Hi, everybody. This is Allison with the Tipsy Nerd Herd. Today, I decided that, well, actually, I've been thinking about this kind of since last week. I have decided to launch this channel, but since doing so, I've realized that I need a lot of equipment and software that I don't have to do a lot of things that I still want to do. However, once I get those, I'm still going to have to learn how to use them. But in the meantime, I was kind of worried that I wasn't going to have enough to talk to you guys about. But then I realized that, you know, I've got about 40 years of liking nerdy stuff under my belt. So can go back a ways and kind of start about the stuff that I originally liked and kind of go from there. And in the process, get to know what you guys are all into, what different fandoms. There's been a lot of different ones for me, from fantasy to vampires, a little bit of horror in my early youth, but now I'm actually terrified of horror shows and have terrible nightmares. So horror's out of the picture for me, but there's a lot of other stuff I like. So I asked on Facebook earlier this week whether you guys would rather start with TV fantasy or whether you would rather start with books, and you guys said basically whatever I was most comfortable with. Although I happen to love both, I definitely am more confident in my TV stuff because I'm able to watch TV a lot more than I'm able to read. Also, it started with TV, so my, I guess, great love for all things fantasy started way back when with Labrynth. So that's where I'm going to start today. Some of these videos will maybe cover more than one thing. Some of them will be just one thing. Labrynth definitely gets its own video because it's Labrynth, and I love it and have so much to say about it. It was actually really interesting to go back from just the fact that I love it, obviously, and always have. But it was interesting to go back and go, well, what was it that made me fall in love with it and why? So it was kind of fun to, I mean, I've rewatched it 100,000 times. Might be a slight exaggeration, but not a big one. Um, but I always just watch it because I love it. And I never think about why I love it, what made me fall in love with it in the first place. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from that standpoint. Um, so Labrynth, I made myself some notes here again. Was a movie that came out in 1986. It was produced by George Lucas and directed by Jim Henson, and they also collaborated with Brian Froud, who he also Jim Henson collaborated on The Dark Crystal with. Actually, before this, although I saw Labrynth first, they had done The Dark Crystal a couple years before, and then they also collaborated with Terry Johnson, who does Monty Python. So it was a lot of people that I love that obviously I didn't know back when it came out in 1986, so I was 6 years old, but I was probably 9-ish before I actually watched it. But Labrynth was literally the first movie that I fell totally in love with, watched it over and over and over and over. So it was just one of those things that just sucked me into the vortex, I guess, and I've been there ever since. So Labrynth is a movie, if you haven't seen it yet, about a girl who's kind of I don't know if she's like a spoiled brat, but she is like a teenager, like, you know, I want what I want when I want it, and angsty teen, like, you make me do chores and that's the devil's work. And so she's you kind of think she's a brat when you first start watching it. And she is upset because her dad and her stepmom, which I think this is another thing that made me identify with Sarah, was that she was a stepchild. And so step parents are great, but sometimes it's a tricky situation, especially during that little adjustment period where you're getting to know each other and, different kids come into the mix. That can always make it tricky. So I think that was like one of the reasons I kind of identified with her. And she wanted to be off in her own world doing the things that she wanted to do. And I definitely can identify with that. But basically, she is supposed to babysit that night, and she is talking to her little brother, and she says, I wish the Goblin King would come and take you away. And lo and behold, he does. So Goblin King is played by none other than David Bowie, who I freaking love. And another thing I love about this movie is definitely the freaking soundtrack. So he's great in this. And if you've watched any of his interviews when he talks about it, you can see how much he loved it, and that makes it even. He was so perfect for the role. I can't imagine anybody else pulling it off in the same fashion he did. It was just so amazing. So he's Jareth, the Goblin King, and he comes and takes the baby, and she instantly says, well, I didn't mean it. And he says, what is said is said. And so that's just a big thing to me. Like, can't take a word back once it's out your mouth. But I'll get into all the lessons of it later. Anyways, so basically, he tells her that if she wants the baby back, she's got to go get him back from his castle that's in the middle of a labyrinth. And I think it's really interesting, the journey she goes on. And I didn't realize, so first of all, as a child, I did not realize this was not a show meant for children. Going back and watching it, I can see that maybe it wasn't necessarily meant for children, but I like that it kind of reached all the eras that were there at the time. Let's see. So when she first starts into the labyrinth, she meets Hoggle. And I think so first of all, that scene is hilarious because when she walks up on Hoggle, he is peeing into a lake. Again, not necessarily for a children's movie, but it was what it was, and I thought it was hilarious then, and I think it's hilarious now. And he is kind of her first quote-unquote friend in this series, and I don't want to get into like absolutely every little detail of that. I kind of do, actually. They have a very interesting friendship because Hoggle is like this tough guy who is also a puppet, by the way. We'll talk about that more too. He is this tough guy, and he's got this gruff exterior, and he, no friends and blah, blah, blah. He's walking around spraying the fairies down, and she thinks he's so mean. Why would you do that? And then she picks up a fairy and it bites her, which that was another thing that way back when I was like, oh my God, it's a mean fairy. But obviously, since I've been in different fandoms a lot longer now, I realize that fairies are often kind of mean. But that was my first time seeing a mean fairy on screen or recognizing a fairy as mean. Usually they were like the, make all of your dreams come true fairies, and these definitely were not. But Hoggle ends up going into the labyrinth with her. They're showing her the way in, actually. And then they bump into each other again later, and you can tell Hoggle has a soft spot for Sarah. However, Jareth, the Goblin King, does not want anybody helping Sarah to get her brother back. He wants to keep Toby with him. So he kind of bullies Hoggle into, not showing her certain things, and eventually he tries to get Hoggle to poison her, not like kill her, just send her into hallucinogenic sleep, which probably not okay, but for movie purposes, this time it was okay. He wasn't trying to violate her, just manipulate her. That sounds so wrong, but seriously, watch the movie. It's okay in this movie situation. Anyways, she meets all kind of incredible creatures and friends throughout her little journey through the labyrinth. So I guess what made the movie so special to me was, one, I already told you the music was amazing. Some of my favorite characters, and they are also probably my first experience with great characters. Like I said, Sarah was kind of a brat, but you love her. She goes on this journey to make things right. Essentially, you save her brother, get him back. And you can't help but love her by the end. The Goblin King, he's kind of this bad guy, but you love him anyways. You see that he just wants his kingdom and his, I don't know, she's not really the girl of his dreams, or maybe she is, because he is in all reality a manifestation of her own mind. I love this movie because it's got things that I reference to this very day, which is the Bog of Eternal Stench. I talk about all the time when things are horribly smelly. I'm like, oh, it smells like the Bog of Eternal Stench, or your ass is like the Bog of Eternal Stench. Slap that baby, make it scream. Sometimes I worry when I'm out in public and say stuff like that to my niece or my kids, and obviously I know I'm referencing a movie, but some people give me kind of weird looks. They clearly haven't seen Labrynth, which is totally their loss. And then my other favorite phrase that I use literally all the time is from Didymus, and it's ha ha ha, tally ho, and then thunk right into the wood. So yeah, that's so very mean. So I kind of watched a little documentary on how it was made this morning, because I was up at 4 o'clock. So I had never seen it before. I guess it was just one of those things. I've watched the movie 1,000 times, but I really haven't gone on YouTube and looked for anything about it. And today I came across this, how it was made. And that was super fun to watch. If you love Labrynth, you will love the how it was made video. It was really cool. It talked about a lot of stuff, and I'll talk about all of that more at the end. I did kind of want to talk about who my favorite characters are and why, and I talked about Sarah some, but I'm going to talk about her more because she is one of the characters, I guess. She would have been a couple years older than me. She was 14 when she filmed this, and I was, well, so yeah, so I was probably 8 or 9, and she was definitely somebody I instantly was like, oh, I wish I could be her. You know, she just, it starts out with her out talking to her dog and practicing for like theater or something, and she's doing lines out of her book before she has to go home. And, you know, definitely I could totally relate to that. I'd rather be out here and play with my dog in the rain and live in my fantasy world, and I don't want to come home to this family I didn't ask for and don't want to do stuff for. And so it instantly grabbed me up and made me identify with her. But I guess what really made me admire her and not just identify with her was the way she handled everything. So I love how she went from this kind of obnoxious kid just kind of shunning her responsibility because it wasn't fair, and you will hear her say, that's not fair, 100 times in that show, because it's true, life isn't fair, and she gets caught in some situations that aren't fair. Even if some of them aren't realistic, it's okay because I like not realistic. But I like how she has to go on this journey of like self-awareness and self-worth. And I feel like you kind of have to have that self-awareness to develop your self-worth. you got to know what's good about you so you can keep doing it, and you got to know what's bad about you so you can work on it. And nobody's ever going to be perfect, but if you just say I am the way I am and fuck everybody else, then that's your prerogative. But I just feel like as a human, it is our responsibility to grow and evolve into the people we want to be, and that is a never ending project. Like, you got to work on it until you can't no more. um, Especially with the pace this world moves at, things change, ideas change. You got to change your mentality sometimes. To You don't have to change your core being or beliefs, but you do have to kind of evolve constantly and learn how to be a better you, because you're not born knowing, and you learn from mistakes just like everybody else. And I always tell my kids, there wasn't a handbook with raising you. I do the best I could, but it's kind of the same thing with life. Like, there's no handbook for every situation. You just do the best you can. You learn from your mistakes, and you try not to be a shit. And when you are, you go back and apologize. So that's way off topic, but it's just, that's kind of, when I went back to rewatch, it's kind of like there were way more valuable lessons in this than I realized as a kid. But I like to think that some of them shaped my thought processes, because I do try, when I say something that's not right and it causes a big ass mess, I try and go back and make it right. And I think that's definitely one of the first lessons you learn in this show, is that you can't take back the things you say, and you often have a way longer road ahead of you to make them right, I guess, or to make the situation okay. Not necessarily make the words right, because you can't make the words right if they're wrong, but you can work to fix the situation. And like I said, often a harder process than just biting your tongue in the first place. So there's that. So then my next favorite character that I have written down, this isn't not necessarily in the order of who's my most favorite to least, it's just some of my favorites, is Hoggle. So like I said, he's like this gruff dude, and he doesn't have any friends. He doesn't need no friends, blah, blah, blah. And you can tell he just has the soft spot in his heart for Sarah. And so he wants to do the right thing by her. He wants to help her. And he feels, he says in the show, he's like, I'm a coward and I'm scared of Jareth, the Goblin King. And so he backs out on her. He abandons her in her time of need, and he feeds her a poison peach, and he does things that he's not proud of, and he does it because he's loyal to the Goblin King and he's scared of him. And that is, how the Goblin King controls them, is by using fear to keep them doing his bidding, the ones who don't want to do it willingly. And I feel like we've all been there, not there specifically, but I think every one of us at some point has been in a situation where you feel like you have to do something to impress your friends or impress your boss, or so somebody won't be mad at you, or and you do something you're not necessarily proud of, and doesn't make it right, but it is definitely one of the things that made me go, yep, I can identify with this guy. I've done stuff I'm not proud of. I've hurt my friends' feelings because, I don't remember, it was a long time ago, and I just don't remember off the top of my head, but I know I've done it, and I know it feels like shit. You don't want to hurt your friends' feelings. And you also don't want to stand up to the person you're afraid of. It's a tricky situation. It's hard. It's one of the things I love about this movie, is that ultimately, when Hoggle does apologize to her, well, he doesn't apologize. He's not really good at that. But he's basically saying he doesn't blame her for not wanting to be his friend, and he knows he messed up, and she just says, she doesn't wait for the apologies. She says, I forgive you. And it's like a changing moment for him. Like, he needed somebody to see him for the friend he could be, and needed someone to see that in him before he could be that. And once she forgave him, he was able to be the good friend that he wanted to be. He had the courage to stand up next to her and be there. But he didn't have it until he had thrown it away, thought he had lost it by betraying her. And, her forgiveness essentially is what made him go, man, she forgave me without even a second thought. Basically, I must really mean something to her. And then he was able to be what he wanted to be. And I think everybody needs friends like that, friends that can see through your faults and see through your mistakes and forgive you and still be there for you. And sometimes it takes having a friend like that to make you be able to be a friend like that. It's hard when people bail on you the first time you mess up, even if you deserve it, because everybody does dumb shit sometimes. And it's tough. It's a tough situation. It's tough being the one who has to forgive, and it's tough being the one who needs to seek the forgiveness. But I think it's good on both parts if everybody kind of learns their lesson and is going to move on and be a good person, be a good geek. So my next favorite on my list is Ludo. He is like this giant beast, but he's so gruff sounding and tough looking and huge, and he's just like this big sweetie, I guess. He just wants friends. He's kind of I wouldn't say a chicken, but like doesn't realize his own size and strength to a certain degree. He also is able to call rocks, so he has like this bond with nature where he can just call rocks up from rivers or to roll down hills or whatever, which I think is really cool. I've always loved nature, and I love that kind of fantasy bond between anybody who can use the elements to their advantage. I always think that's really cool. So this was one of my first experiences with that, and I really loved it. And I really love Ludo. He's just wants to be friends with pretty much anybody who's nice to him, actually. And like I said, he's this big tough beast, but he doesn't, like, the only time he uses his strength is to protect his friends. Like, they literally have him strung up by his foot when you first meet him, and he's kind of reaching around, but he could in theory do way more harm than he was doing at that time. He could have called rocks then. He could have done a lot of things, but he was just, kind of not he was kind of letting them do it because he could have done a lot more damage. And he was just kind of taking their torture for what it was. And that's when Sarah finds him and she helps get him down. And that's when they become friends. And I love that moment because, she even says, things aren't always what they seem in here. I'm not scared. And she goes and lets him down. And he looks scary, yeah, but he's this great guy. And the only time he ever uses his strength beyond that is to protect his friends. So I think that's really cool, a really good lesson. So after she meets Ludo, they end up running back into Hoggle, and then they all end up in the Bog of Eternal Stench. And they're on their way out of there when you come across one of my other favorite characters, which is Didymus, the guy who says, "Oh, tell who." He's guarding this bridge that's on the way out of the Bog of Eternal Stench. And I just love it because he's like just so blinded by his mission to guard this bridge. And he's telling them like, you cannot pass, blah, blah, blah. This is my charge I've been charged with, and I can't let you do it. And they end up saying, well, what would it take for you to let us across? Like, what exactly do we have to do? And he's like, no one can cross this bridge without my permission. And Sarah's, well, can we have your permission? And of course he's like, yes. But it's just funny to me because it's like one of those situations where he's like so blinded by his current charge that he almost missed out on this adventure he ends up going on with them. And he is such a spirited little guy. He's so funny. He's fun. He's a fun character. But he almost misses out on this adventure because he's like blinded by his current tasks. So I think this is kind of one of those other like lessons to take away from things, like don't close the door to new opportunities just because of what you're doing now. Always like, I don't know, if you have the chance to go on an adventure, then go on an adventure. Anyways, he ends up letting them pass and he joins them on their little adventure. So let's see. And then, of course, my other favorite character is Jareth, the Goblin King. So I don't know. I've already told you he's played by David Bowie, and that, it's just so outstanding. Okay, so it's old, it's cheesy, but the freaking, like, after coming from cons and thinking about, like, the possibility for cosplays with this, like, there's so many good ones in there. Their masquerade ball that they do, I think that's amazing. I would love to do that. But he's this eccentric character, and I don't think anyone else could have played it off the same way, but all of these characters, basically, except for Sarah, are a manifestation from her own mind. And it's one of the things they talk about in that documentary about how it was made this morning, was that he was a manifestation of her mind, of like what she wanted the Goblin King to be, what she imagined him as. They gave him that pop star, mysterious, and it was just really, really cool. And I can't even put into words all the reasons I love him. I just can't do it. But if you go back and watch the show, if you've never seen it before, I highly recommend it. It is not going to be like your current CGI. You're probably going to think it's cheesy as far as costumes and stuff go, but it's really actually pretty amazing, especially for the time it was created in. And again, I just think there's so much you could take away from the movie. So I guess I'll go there. I'll go to the rest of my lessons that I noted before I go back to like the documentary part of it. So I already talked about this. Jared saying what is said, and how you just can't go back and unsay it. You have to actually do things to make them right. And then I talked about this one too, Hoggle betraying her and regretting it, but how her forgiveness gave him like the confidence and courage to be a real friend. I think that's a valuable lesson on both sides. And then Sarah has so many lessons. So hers is, just being an adolescent teenage girl who's kind of trying to figure out her way into an adult world. That's so hard on any given level, but she really portrays it well. And when I was watching the documentary, one of the things they said was that was kind of what this, this is why it wasn't supposed to be a kids movie. This was about, it was geared more towards, I guess, teenagers and adults, about the profound, experience of a girl becoming an adult and what's that's like, basically. And it's weird that they use puppets and all of that to portray it, but they actually do it really well because she does go on this huge journey. So she's trying to find her place in the adult world, in her family. Like I said, it's a step family, so that can be tricky in itself. And she starts out kind of that spoiled brat, and she starts on this journey of self-awareness, and she's learned so many lessons. The one with Hoggle, where she's like just got to get through this gruff exterior, and she's got to learn that he really is a good guy underneath, and she has to forgive him without him asking. And because she sees that his inner self does want to be there for her, and he's just he tells her he's afraid of the Goblin King. He's no good, he's a coward. And she sees through that, and she sees his potential, and she makes this wonderful friend. And then with Ludo, she sees this big scary guy, but she's like, things aren't always what they seem. And she makes a friend there. She goes to this masquerade ball, which is really another manifestation of what she thinks she wants. So I think this is like a big thing. I think this is actually very symbolic in a lot of ways. So the way she gets to this masquerade ball is by eating the peach that Hoggle gave her that was poisoned by the Goblin King. And so when she falls into her dream sleep, she dreams about this masquerade ball, and everything is just very adult. It's way too grown for a 14-year-old. And you can tell she kind of sees that while she's looking around, and they go through the scene, and it's a beautiful scene. Oh my God. If ever, that is the masquerade ball. Well, Ball at the Wall is still number one for me, but if I would give anything to go to a Labrynth themed masquerade ball, oh my God, it would be heaven for me. But back to her, I think that she realizes while she's there, while she's doing all this, while she's living her dream, that she thinks she's ready for. Because when you're 14, what aren't you ready for? You're ready to be an adult. You think you know it all. You are ready to do whatever. So I think biting that poison peach, I think that's almost indicative of toxic behavior, getting you into a situation like that, getting you into a situation where you should probably not be, but you thought you were grown enough to handle it. And then she's there for a while, and she dances with the Goblin King, and you can tell it kind of all starts to click that this isn't right and it's not what it's supposed to be. And she walks up to this looking glass, which I think is also symbolic, and she literally has to shatter it. And to me, that's kind of symbolic of you have to look at yourself, and you have to look to yourself to get you out of situations that your own toxic behavior got you into. You can't count on other people to do it. So I feel like by shattering that glass, she kind of shattered the whatever was in her head that made her go, oh, I'm old enough. I feel like she was like, yeah, I get it now. I'm 14. I'm dressed like a woman and dancing with a Goblin King, and that's probably not right. So I'm going to shatter this illusion, which is essentially what it was, and move on. And she still runs into obstacles, because the very next scene, she's with the junk lady who's like, oh, you just want to be home. You want this. You want this. And again, I think that's symbolic of you can't let other people do and do and do for you. You have to be able to do for yourself. You have to be able to get yourself through certain situations, which isn't to say you shouldn't use the support of other people. But the junk lady is just giving her things from her past, her trinkets, her teddy bears, her lipstick. She's kind of coddling her back in her old room that's not really her old room. But, again, it's kind of the symbolism. You can't go back to doing exactly what you were doing before and hope to become a different person. You have to keep going. So she realizes, this is just an illusion too. I'm on a mission. I've got to keep going. There's something I'm doing. And so she gets out of there too, and I think it's just so symbolic in ways that I never even really thought about up until today. Well, not today, but like phone's going off nonstop. Sorry. Um, and then I guess the very last big lesson is when she is with the Goblin King trying to get Toby. The final, well, not final scene, almost final scene. That, she's going up and down the steps and he's over here, he's over there. She just doesn't feel like she's making any headway. And finally, she comes face to face with her Goblin King, face to face with her demon. And she ultimately has to say, "You have no power over me." And I think that's what we have to do with anything in life that is our demon that we know we need to get away from. We have to decide that it has no power over us. We have to decide to move on and not let it control us. Um, so I just think, on top of this movie being great for so many reasons, I just loved watching it over and over anyways before, but going back and rewatching it a couple times, trying to see what made me fall in love with it in the first place, I just realized how much I took away from this show without even realizing it. Um, so I guess I'll get to the documentary part of it. So let me go back here. What I thought was really cool about the documentary. Okay, so first of all, I knew Jim Henson was involved, obviously, and I even knew that he had collaborated with the guy from Dark Crystal, which I did not realize his name, um, but that was Brian Froud. So I knew they had collaborated, um, and I knew it was Jim Henson, but I did not realize, I guess, that it was produced by George Lucas, which I think is really cool because obviously I'm a fan of him with other stuff also. And so I did not realize that he was involved with that. And I did not realize that Terry Johnson, who does Monty Python, was also collaborated with them on this. It's actually where a lot of the humor came from. So especially like the scene with the door knockers. So he was heavily involved in that. He brought them from being minor characters to having a little more to say. And I think there's so many funny little lines in here with the goblins. And he was, a lot of this is he added into the script. So I think, brilliant. These four people collaborating was just brilliant. Um, so all the puppets were from Jim Henson's Creature Shop, um, which really, light years above ahead of pretty much everything else at that time. And maybe, well, not still, maybe so. I don't know. But they did so good, and they still do a lot of awesome stuff. I was so impressed with listening to, where the ideas came from and how they put them all together. But what really, I think, really got me was that they would have to have 4 to 5 people controlling one character. So like Hoggle, they had like, one person in the suit walking around that had to have the body language right, one person doing the voice, another person doing like different parts of his face. So they had a couple people doing like different, like the eyes, the eyebrows, the mouth. So they really had to all collaborate to get this character where it needed to be. And they nailed it. It's amazing. I can't imagine having 5 people put the effort into acting one character and them being able to pull it off. And they did it with several characters. So I think that's really super impressive. So another thing I found totally fascinating was, I've said this 100 times, but David Bowie, just being able to watch him again talk about this project, it was just so special to me. He really shed some insight on him and Sarah's relationship in this movie, and also kind of how underappreciated it was. Like, people didn't really understand what the movie really didn't have great ratings at the time, although it does have a pretty decent um, following now. It wasn't really as appreciated then as it is now. Um, how perfect Jennifer Connelly was for the role. Like, I always thought she was just brilliant in it anyways. Like I said, she is one of the first people I ever looked up to and wanted to be her, but watching her on this, like, you really see that they couldn't have chosen anybody better. She was just at the perfect stage of her life. Um, they said she was so easy to work with that when they like needed to correct something, she just was like, all right, let's correct it and move on. And but she just really had the right mindset, and I think she nailed it. So that was fun to watch. Let's see. So I thought this was super cool. So Brian Froud, who collaborated, had originally done a drawing of the baby. So this was actually of Toby. It was just the baby at the time because it was before his son Toby was conceived. But as it turns out, his son Toby looked exactly like the baby he drew. They actually show on the documentary the drawing, and um, it is really cool that he kind of imagined that and then it happened. Um, Hi, Kelly. I miss you, and I love that movie too. I'm so glad you're here. Um, I thought that was really cool that his son got to play in the movie, and that they named the character Toby because his son's name was Toby, and that's how they were able to get his attention is by calling his name. So the character is actually named for his son who played in the movie. And I think that is really cool. Jim Henson's son, he also was able to get involved later in the movie. I think he said it was after, it was after Terry Johnson got involved and sent in that final script, then he got to be involved. He was involved with like the tunnel of hands. He got to sit home and like make the different hand faces together. And he said that was a really fun part of it for him. So I think having different family members involved all in the same movie was really cool. They said it was like family on set, and then there were actual family members on set. So I thought that was cool. Anyways, and then the last thing I thought was like really super cool that I had no idea about. It is not David Bowie spinning the balls. So when he's standing there talking to whoever and he's spinning the balls and making them roll up and down his arm and all that stuff, there's actually somebody crouched behind him that has their hands up. So they're doing that without even looking at their own hands. They're just like maneuvering the balls around like bosses. I think it's so cool that you can do that, period, much less do it without seeing what you're doing. So I thought that was a really interesting fact. There was other stuff. If you love Labrynth and you haven't already watched the how it was made, I just looked it up on YouTube and it was really cool, really worth my time. I would totally watch it again. I probably will. So I think that is it for this week. That was my start into fandom. I never knew it. I never realized it then. I didn't realize it till many years later that I was kind of to that voice. I didn't ever think about it. I just liked what I liked. I guess I think most of us are probably like that. We just liked what we liked and we're into what we're into. And now we realize that there's a bunch of other people like us. And we may not have had those people around us to talk to about this stuff growing up, but now we do thanks to the internet. So I think that's all I'm going to say about Labrynth. Next week, I am going to do The Dark Crystal because that was my second favorite movie ever. And it's also got The Age of Resistance coming out on Netflix. So I think it's kind of the perfect time to cover that one. And then talk about The Age of Resistance coming up because I'm so excited for it. And then I don't know where I'm going to go from there. Like I said, some weeks we'll have just one movie or series, and other weeks might have more. It just really depends what I come up with throughout the week. And oh, Kelly, I can't wait neither. So hopefully we'll have some good stuff to talk about. Feel free to let me know what you like, what your favorite characters are, um, what your takeaways from any movie are, or what character you identified with. I would love to hear about what you guys are interested in as well. And hopefully, we'll have some common interests and be able to talk a lot more about them. Love you guys.